Candace, it's a joyous occasion to move to a new home, yet the fact that you're here is unbearable to us. Please do not set foot in the new house. Without cooking skills or consideration and living while depending on your husband. Can you imagine what would happen if you were divorced? We want to avoid unnecessary troubles at the start of a new life. Unaware of the fact that I was providing our living expenses, my mother-in-law mocked me as unnecessary in the new home. Having been treated like a housemaid by my husband and seen as a nuisance by my mother-in-law, I eventually chose divorce. As a result, they fell into the abyss of unhappiness. My name is Candace. I am 30 years old, and my profession is an illustrator. 2 years have passed since I became independent, and now I mainly work from home. I met Kevin, my husband, at the beginning of my independence, and he pursued me passionately, leading to our marriage. I was not interested in marriage and had little experience in love, so my decision to marry surprised everyone around me. I had significant anxiety about marriage, but Kevin's positive nature was comforting, especially in the beginning when he encouraged me when I was tired. However, it seems our happiness lasted only while we were dating. Even as someone inexperienced in love, I was aware that there are important things we need to do for marriage, such as meeting the future partner's family. However, Kevin's response to it was, "Marriage is a matter between the two of us, and family isn't that important, right?" He didn't seem very enthusiastic and rather appeared to avoid getting our families involved. I should have sought advice from someone at that time. However, since I was inexperienced in love, I thought it was normal and decided on marriage lightly. After that, Kevin, who was once kind, changed completely. Once we started living together, he attempted to dominate the household, didn't touch any household chores, complained constantly, and his financial management was sloppy. During our dating days, I was attracted to his passion for work, but after marriage, that passion faded and he became lazier. Furthermore, I was told he worked at a famous company, but in reality, it was a subsidiary and his income was less than half of mine. Our marriage life showed ominous signs from the beginning and began to shake within a month. Another realization was the abnormal love my mother-in-law had for Kevin, as if he was her entire life. She is living alone, and her life seems to revolve around Kevin. She has pampered Kevin, her only son, since birth, and so he became incapable of doing anything without his mother. However, his mother prefers this situation, continuing to spoil Kevin, even at 30 now. When I first visited his family home after marriage, I was completely ignored, and his mother showered Kevin alone with affection. Seeing her wiping his face while saying, "Kevin, you have some sweets on your face," made me shudder. Kevin accepted his mother's overprotection as if it were natural, and I was just dumbfounded. Eventually, my presence was completely ignored. I wasn't even offered a cup of coffee. Disgusted by this coldness, I told Kevin I didn't want to visit again. Yet, he kept trying to take me to his parents' house. The situation continued unchanged. 2 years have passed since the marriage, and there hasn't been a day I don't regret it. Leaving all household chores to me, he spends his days on games or spends money carelessly. My dissatisfaction kept piling up. However, Kevin would say occasionally, "Cooking is hard, isn't it?" showing some concern for me. Initially, I thought he had a kind side, but now I understand the reality. Kevin secretly informs his mother that I don't cook and laughs about it. As a result, my mother-in-law takes his words at face value and despises me as a useless bride. Moreover, not understanding that I work from home, she sees me as a lazy wife who stays at home all the time. Ever since she learned about my home-based work, she started visiting unannounced. One day, the uninvited mother-in-law appeared again. Because Kevin gave her a spare key, I can't avoid her. "Candace, why are you zoning out when you have a mother-in-law? And what about the mess in this room?" I feel sorry for Kevin. "Since you're at home, you should at least clean up," she criticized, and I wanted to retort that it was actually her son's fault the room got messy. "Mother, as I've told you many times, sudden visits disrupt my work." I informed her and returned to my work, but the complaints continued unabated from behind. What a cold wife you are. What work? Is it all lies? You want to exclude me, so you resort to such fabrications. Kevin is being deceived by this terrible woman. How pitiful. The real victim here is me. You know nothing. I whispered quietly in a voice that wouldn't reach my mother-in-law. Eventually, my mother-in-law finished her lunch and even packed dinner in a food container to take home. As expected, she left without a word of thanks, never short of complaints about the meal. Hey, can you please get the spare key back from your mother? Even when I tell Kevin that her visits interfere with my work, he doesn't listen. She's lonely, so give her some attention. She's like a mother to you, isn't she? Kevin seems to take his mother's side. Even so, I have work too. Meals that I could quickly prepare alone become an ordeal when she's around. Well, your job is just drawing, right? You're doing it at home, so it shouldn't be tiring. What? Are you trying to make it seem harder than it is? Kevin belittles and insults my work. How can you say that? Wow, scary. Why are you getting so heated? There's no need to get angry when faced with the truth. Working means going to a workplace, like I do, supporting the household, handling all the chores, and dealing with my mother-in-law as well. I was exhausted from not being able to focus on my work. I started to question if Kevin's presence was necessary at all. Being alone would be so much easier. He was clearly becoming an obstacle for me. Lately, I couldn't shake off the idea of divorce, and just imagining it excited me. Thinking about life after leaving Kevin and his mother. Where should I live? Then, a great idea struck me. That's it. Maybe buying a slightly larger apartment with a workspace is a good choice. My imagination kept expanding. Fantasizing about this became my greatest joy and mental support at that time. However, perhaps because I was so caught up in thinking about the apartment, I made a significant mistake. What's this brochure? Kevin found the apartment brochure I had requested. Oh, that. I was just looking at it for a distraction. I tried to explain, but Kevin didn't seem to be listening and suddenly became excited. Wow, are we moving? That's amazing. This apartment is really fantastic. Kevin, thrilled, assumed he would be living there too. I panicked, thinking my consideration of divorce had been exposed. But I was grateful for Kevin's obliviousness. I was worried for a moment, but my desire for a larger space worked out, and his suspicion was averted. Kevin is simple-minded and acts impulsively. So, he immediately signed a contract for the apartment he liked in the brochure. Having already decided on divorce in my heart, I maneuvered to have the mortgage in Kevin's name. Wait, I wasn't planning on buying it. The mortgage should be in your name, right? What, you want me to pay? Suddenly, Kevin's mood soured. I'm self-employed and in my second year, so I don't think I can take out a mortgage. While it's possible that a lender willing to finance could be found, I doubt Kevin would look that far. Why are you saying this? Just because we're married, don't rely on me. You're the one who's going to pay. Kevin raised his voice in anger and kicked a nearby chair. I quietly steered the conversation to avoid his anger. Well, if I were to buy it, I would be the owner. But don't you think it would look more impressive if it were in your name, Kevin? Kevin seemed to calm down with those words. He's probably seeking the satisfaction of owning his own apartment. Then, I made the final push. Aren't you excited about having an apartment all to yourself? You can boast about it to your friends. That seemed to motivate Kevin. Since deciding on the apartment, Kevin has been neglecting his work and immersing himself in the apartment and renovations. To avoid arousing suspicions of divorce, I made sure to pretend we were still planning to live together. As part of that, I insisted that renovations were unnecessary. He wouldn't guess that I was considering divorce if I was worried about the renovation costs. Kevin, the cost will skyrocket if we add renovations. How about we skip the renovations? Don't ruin the fun, just handle the payments quietly. Over these 2 years, I've come to understand his personality well. If I say this, he'll insist on the renovations even more. Also, I want a room for my hobbies. If you want to work, why not do it in the living room? Kevin, as always, made self-centered suggestions. Just so you know, I won't be spending a dime. You can cover it with your earnings, right? Kevin infuriated me without feeling any responsibility. Be more realistic. Stop imposing financial burdens on me. Working in the living room is impossible. Who are you talking to like that? Just follow my orders quietly. Can't you even respect your husband, you incompetent wife? I won't hesitate to divorce you. Kevin thought he was bringing up something disadvantageous for me, but if it happens, it would actually be favorable for me. So, I took out the divorce papers I've kept for a long time. Fine, let's divorce. Sign here. I doubt you have the courage, though. I provoked him. What, are you mocking me? I'm done with a woman like you. Saying so, Kevin angrily signed and threw the divorce papers. His anger didn't subside as he left the room. After a while, Kevin seemed normal again, and I was surprised, but I kept quiet and immersed myself in my daily routine. I was satisfied with the current situation. As the move's preparations neared their end, Kevin left the packing to his mother and Ida passed the time. Then, the moving day arrived. Kevin headed to the new place first, leaving the final room arrangements to me and my mother-in-law. Candace, it's a joyous occasion to move to a new home, yet the fact that you're here is unbearable to us. Please do not set foot in the new house. Without cooking skills or consideration and living while depending on your husband. Can you imagine what would happen if you were divorced? We want to avoid unnecessary troubles at the start of a new life. Suddenly, my mother-in-law started this conversation and I got confused. Do you understand? Only I can live with my son. We don't need an incompetent wife like you. Can't you just leave him? Why did he marry such an unremarkable woman like you? She continued her tirade without stopping. What cohabitation are you talking about? Kevin never mentioned this, nor did he consult me. It's unbelievable he would hide such a crucial decision. He was truly a useless husband. Well, I'm surprised. Didn't you know? Kevin was concerned about me living alone and suggested we live together. How kind-hearted my son is. While I was stunned by the sudden announcement, I didn't respond to her joy. How much easier it would be without someone like you who can't even cook properly and continues to depend on Kevin. Don't resent the hardships after the divorce. We don't need extra baggage in our new life. I almost smiled, but I suppressed it. That was close. Holding the divorce papers Kevin signed during a previous argument. I decide to pack my things and leave. I understand. I'll leave. My mother-in-law was momentarily surprised by my quick agreement, but was inwardly pleased to see the nuisance gone. If you understand, that's good. Don't show your face here again. Don't come crawling back in a pathetic state when you're out of money. I replied, I understand, and left the room, leaving my mother-in-law behind. Her mocking laughter echoed behind me, but I no longer cared. I received a call from Kevin right after I had submitted the divorce papers and arrived at my new apartment, which I had contracted just for myself. Why? Why is only Mom here? Hurry up and get the room ready. His shouting voice filled the room, even though he was not on speakerphone. Actually, your mother suggested I divorce you. So, I submitted the divorce papers you signed. We're no longer related. Please, don't contact me anymore. What are you talking about? Without you, what will happen to the apartment payments and living expenses? My ex-husband yelled in anger. What? What are you saying? Aren't you responsible for the payments? I could hear my mother-in-law's voice, shaken. She must have been under the impression that her son earned a high income. Kevin, directing his anger at his mother, blamed her. Shut up. This is your fault. But the fundamental issue was Kevin himself. I'm sorry. I didn't want to get divorced. I'll have Mom leave here, so please, let's cancel the divorce. Kevin, cornered, was teary on the other end of the phone. For a long time, I've been nothing more to you than a wallet that does housework, right? It's clear that what you're most worried about now is the heavy mortgage repayment. I understand how difficult it will be for you to repay that mortgage on your own. No, that's not it. I truly love you from the bottom of my heart, he argued, but I didn't listen to his words. Indeed, he loved me as a wallet that did his chores and supported him financially. Letting go of such a convenient wallet that fulfilled all his needs must be unimaginable for him. I'm not seeking a parasite that I need to support at the expense of myself. Besides, your mother said the same thing, right? It's better not to bring unnecessary baggage. I completely agree with her. A parasite? How can you say that? You can't just say anything you want. He exploded in anger. Kevin always does this. Whenever something doesn't go his way, his emotions burst out. At the start of my new life, I don't need you on my path forward. You are just a burden in my life now. The thought of our relationship ending and starting anew clears my heart. What? Don't say that. I too want to be done with someone like you and feel refreshed. Don't come crying back to me. Don't contact me ever again. He shouted. Understood. I gladly accept. Oh, my true feelings slipped out, I murmured. I couldn't hide my feelings anymore. Of course, I can pay the mortgage and living expenses on my own. But in your case, with limited income, you will struggle every day with living expenses and mortgage repayments. We are now strangers. Whatever happens to you is none of my concern. Face those difficulties with your beloved mother. Let's keep our promise and never contact each other again. Kevin seemed to wake up after my firm statement. No, that's not what I wanted to say. He tried to argue, but I ignored his words and ended the call. I immediately blocked any further calls. Even though Kevin was scolded by his mother after she found out the whole story, she continued to pamper him. Kevin still had no intention of becoming independent and deepened his dependence on his mother. However, there are areas where he cannot afford to be dependent. That is the repayment of the mortgage. They are working hard to somehow repay the massive mortgage, but the repayment is nowhere near sufficient due to the unauthorized renovations. After a day's work, more work awaits them, and they return to the apartment only for sleep. It's incomprehensible what the purpose of buying the apartment was, and their lifestyle is baffling. Just thinking about the amount to be paid instills fear. Kevin, perhaps seeking help, visited the previous apartment several times but ended up disappointed for not being able to find me. I'm really glad I got divorced. I absolutely wanted to avoid those impossible mortgage repayments. By setting up a workspace in my new home, my concentration has improved, and my work performance has significantly increased. Getting rid of unnecessary baggage was the right decision. Since the divorce, I've been free from unnecessary stress, work is going well, and I am enjoying comfortable days. Get out because I'm moving in with my family. Jeff pointed at us and loudly declared while my in-laws were giving instructions to the movers. His face twisted maliciously, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. However, Stacy next to me reacted differently, asking Jeff with confusion, "Dad, you didn't know?" Hearing this, Jeff was visibly puzzled. Stacy seemed so flustered that not only Jeff but also his mother and father stopped what they were doing and looked over at us. But Nicole continued to give instructions to the movers, seemingly uninterested in the situation. Despite my dismay at the behavior of Jeff's family, I was determined to reveal a certain truth. My name is Dina Anderson, a 46-year-old remote worker. I have a husband and a daughter, leading a typical life. After several dates, Jeff proposed to me 3 years into our relationship. Having a frequently ill mother, I wanted to marry as soon as possible to give her peace of mind, so I accepted Jeff's proposal. Sometime after our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. Jeff was truly happy, eagerly looking forward to seeing our child. When our daughter Stacy was born, Jeff took an active role in parenting, and I lived happily. However, I had some worries. The biggest concern was about my mother. Her health improved upon seeing her grandchild, despite being almost bedridden before, and she visited us often. Initially, she visited frequently, but as Stacy entered middle school, my mother's health visibly declined. I quit my job to be available for my mother, choosing remote work. This decision allowed me to fully take care of my mother's hospital admissions and discharges by the time Stacy graduated middle school. My mother was very happy when we visited her. I hoped she would gradually recover and be able to go out as before. However, around this time, Jeff's behavior began to change. Initially, he was willing to help with my mother's care, but lately, he had become grumpy, complaining that I wasn't paying attention to him. Going to your mother's again? You don't care for me when I'm tired from work, but you always look after your sick mother. I wish I were sick too. He would say such incomprehensible things, and even when Stacy and I tried to appease him, he strongly rejected our efforts. Worried about both my mother and Jeff, Stacy took over caring for Jeff. Mom, leave Dad to me. You should go to Grandma's sooner, Stacy said with a smile, and I always relied on her. One day, while living this way, I received a call from my sister-in-law, Nicole. You've been neglecting my brother lately, she accused out of the blue, making me stare at my phone screen in surprise. I wondered if there was a mix-up, but Nicole's name was clearly displayed on my phone screen. Confused by the baseless accusation, I could only deny it. It's been a while, Nicole. What's going on all of a sudden? I haven't been neglecting Jeff. I was clueless as to why Nicole would say such a thing. Don't play dumb. I've heard it from my brother. Lately, you've been neglecting the house to care only for your own mother. Can you still proudly call yourself a wife? Indeed, I had been focusing more on my ill mother lately, but I never thought Jeff would tell Nicole about it. However, I wasn't neglecting our home. Stacy helps with the household chores when she gets back from school, and I manage both my work and my mother's care along with the housework. Lately, I did feel like Jeff's complaints had increased, but they were about trivial things like wanting to eat at expensive restaurants or not liking the smell of the laundry detergent, things we couldn't do much about. I was not neglecting the household chores. Just as I was about to explain in detail, Nicole said something shocking. Unfortunately, this has reached our parents too. Someday, our angry mother might come to scold you. Leaving me with those irrational words, Nicole hung up immediately. Surprised by the unexpected turn of events, I was speechless until Stacy spoke to me. Mom, I'm home. What happened? You look stunned. Regaining my composure, I told Stacy, who had just returned from school, about the conversation. Stacy, too, was shocked and incredulous, sighing in disbelief. Hey, Mom. There's something I've been thinking about for a while. Can I talk to you about it? Nervously, I nodded to Stacy's serious request. Listening to Stacy's concerns made me feel truly disheartened. During a period filled with Jeff's nonsensical complaints and Nicole's harassing calls, my in-laws finally took action. One day, after visiting my mother, I came home to find my mother-in-law cooking in the kitchen. Entering the living room, I was so surprised that I dropped my things and just stood there, staring at her. Noticing me, my mother-in-law frowned and approached. Oh, you're back. How's your mother? Well, have a seat anyway. Feeling her irritation, I had no choice but to follow her past me to our living room sofa, where I received a lengthy lecture. Initially, she scolded me for my attitude towards Jeff and berated me for neglecting my household duties and making my husband do chores. However, I noticed some inconsistencies in her lecture and corrected her. Mother, there are some misunderstandings. I have never made Jeff do the household chores. In fact, Jeff hardly helps at all. Embarrassingly, it's Stacy who helps me out. Hearing this, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up, pointed at me, and started shouting. Do you think that lie will work on me? Are you saying that child is lying to me? What a terrible daughter-in-law. That's enough. With her face red with anger, she stormed out, leaving the stove on and everything behind like a tempest. I hurried to turn off the stove so I couldn't chase after my mother-in-law. That day, Jeff was in a strangely good mood, almost unnervingly generous. He kept cutting me off every time I tried to start a conversation. Stacy also seemed puzzled by this, so we decided to stay silent and watch the situation for now, not wanting to upset Jeff. For a few days, Jeff continued to be in a good mood without any issues. Thanks to that, I was able to take care of my mother without feeling uneasy. However, a few days later, my mother quietly passed away. Stacy and I, though engulfed in sadness, managed to get through the funeral and decided to spend some time sorting through my mother's belongings at her house. I had wanted Jeff to help, but mentioning it made him sullen for the first time in a while. So, Stacy and I proceeded with the task, and naturally, the house was filled with memories of my mother, making it difficult to make much progress as each item reminded us of her. I reluctantly contacted Jeff and ended up staying at my mother's house for the night, but he seemed to be in a good mood. Take your time and relax since you're already there, he said, but with Stacy's school and my work, it wasn't that simple. For the time being, I told him we would return home the next day and decided to rest for the night. The next day, after making some progress with the sorting, we decided to go back to our house. As we approached our home, I noticed a large truck parked in front of the house. Wondering what it was, I realized it was a moving truck, with Jeff and my mother-in-law directing the unloading. What's going on here? I ran up with Stacy to stop them, but Jeff stepped forward, puffing out his chest as he noticed us. What? You're back already? It's too late for you to return now. What? As I stood there in shock, watching the belongings being moved into the house, Jeff crossed his arms and continued proudly. I'm moving in with my family, so you two need to leave. While the movers were receiving instructions from my in-laws, Jeff pointed at us and loudly declared. His face twisted maliciously, and I couldn't help but show my disgust. However, Stacy, standing next to me, asked Jeff with confusion. Dad, you didn't know? Hearing this, Jeff was visibly puzzled. Stacy seemed so flustered that not only Jeff but also his mother and father stopped what they were doing and looked over at us. But Nicole continued to give instructions to the movers, seemingly uninterested in the situation. Despite my dismay at the behavior of Jeff's family, I was determined to reveal a certain truth. Forgotten? This house is mine. The in-laws were shocked, and Jeff began to panic, turning pale. Even Nicole stopped directing the movers and confronted me. What are you talking about? There's no way you could afford to build such a fine house. Now it was my turn to respond with confidence. Thank you for the compliment. This house was built by my father, and originally, it's my family home. That can't be true. This house is so beautiful, it looks almost brand new. Does it look that way? Thank you, Mother. My mom renovated it for us as a wedding gift. Jeff should know about this. I couldn't understand how it could have been forgotten, but this house is naturally in my name, and the renovation costs were covered by my mother. She moved out happily to an apartment so that we could live here happily for a long time. Jeff and I went to thank my mother and even discussed living together. Jeff, who tends to forget things that don't suit him, seemed to realize that his plan had failed. And, just as I was about to speak, Stacy began to share information she learned from the inheritance process. Grandma left a lot of assets for me and Mom, but it's not money. It's things like land and apartments that can't easily be converted into cash. Hearing this, Jeff turned to his parents with shining eyes, and Nicole raised her hand in joy. Wait a minute. I had no idea your mother had so much wealth. You never said anything about this when we got married. Jeff's outburst led his family to start complaining selfishly. What's that? Isn't that like marriage fraud? That's terrible. You intentionally kept quiet because you didn't intend to give Jeff any of the property. What a greedy woman. And from the conversation earlier, it sounded like only you two would inherit everything? My father-in-law, who noticed the most crucial part, looked at us, and I nodded clearly while explaining the situation. Yes, the inheritance is divided between Stacy and me only. Jeff gets nothing. We found the will while sorting through the belongings yesterday. Hearing this, Jeff's family turned red with anger, especially his mother, who was the most furious. This can't be allowed. We'll get a divorce then. I'll make sure to get compensation from you. As his mother screamed in anger and frustration, I accepted her reaction without hesitation. Yes, I agreed to the divorce. The moment I agreed, his mother turned around and ran off, presumably to the city office, which is probably close by, to get a divorce form. I deliberately did not stop her angry departure and watched her leave. As I watched his mother head to the office, Jeff asked me grumpily, "Hey, what are you planning to do now?" "What do you mean? Are you talking about the divorce or where you will live?" "Both." Jeff almost snapped at me, but I looked up at the house indifferently. "This house is actually already on the market," I said, which surprised Jeff. "What?" Confused by my words, Jeff looked puzzled. He exchanged looks with his father and then looked back at me. He didn't seem to understand what I meant. Of course, it was to be expected. While we were spending another night at my mother's house, there was no way Jeff and his family could have imagined that I was selling this house. Facing the puzzled Jeff and his family, I once again spoke up with confidence. "I've always felt it. Every time you treated me terribly, I wondered why I married you. I put up with it for Stacy's sake. But even Stacy said she couldn't take it anymore with you." Jeff, faced with this shocking truth, turned pale and looked at Stacy. Then Stacy firmly met Jeff's gaze and voiced her thoughts. "Dad, you always said it was sad to be ignored as the head of the house, or to be belittled after coming home tired from work. But don't you think there's a reason you're treated that way? Why don't you realize that you're neglecting and belittling us?" Stacy's pointed words left Jeff speechless. I thought if he just silently signed the divorce papers, sulking away, I would have nothing more to say. Just as I was thinking this, Nicole blurted out something shocking. If I knew it would come to this, I wouldn't have bothered with the renovation." Everyone present was taken aback by this sudden confession, looking at Nicole all at once. I was surprised not only that Jeff and my father-in-law were unaware of Nicole's actions, but also by her statement itself. "Why would you do something like that without permission?" yelled my father-in-law, to which Nicole started making excuses without much concern. "I wanted to live in my ideal room, okay? So I thought, why not take over this house and renovate it while we're at it? But you're selling the house, right? Oh, but if you're selling it, why not renovate it and sell it for more?" Nicole's nonchalant and cheery demeanor as she said this made Stacy and me sigh. Not only were we dismayed, but Jeff and my father-in-law felt the same, with Jeff clenching his fists in suppressed anger. Finally, unable to tolerate Nicole's recklessness, he began to yell, "Hey, Cess, even if it's going to be sold or become ours, you should have told us first. We were preparing to move. Where were we supposed to live during the renovation?" Though his preamble was a bit off, his point was valid, leaving Nicole surprised. "Oh, really?" As Nicole responded, Jeff was about to yell again when we saw my mother-in-law running towards us from a distance. It seemed she had brought the divorce papers. "I got it, the divorce papers. Now, sign it right here." Despite being out of breath and excited, my mother-in-law, who was handing me the divorce papers, was unaware of the commotion that had just occurred. But that didn't matter to me. I took the divorce papers from her and handed them to Jeff. "You write it. After all the times you've belittled me, you agree to our divorce, right?" "No way." Jeff immediately refused, possibly because he knew about my mother's inheritance. However, I couldn't tolerate Jeff's behavior and his family's strange antics any longer. So, I provoked him, aiming to get him to write the divorce papers. Changing your tune so suddenly? I guess you've been in a good mood lately because you were thinking of taking over my house, right? Too bad. Even without my mother's inheritance, I had no intention of handing over this house, and it's already planned to be sold. Either way, you'll end up homeless. At my words, Jeff looked bitterly at the divorce papers. Trying to control his anger and calm himself, I knew too well the points that would set Jeff off. It might be a disgrace to you, but if you sign this divorce paper, I might feel a bit relieved. I figured that by demanding from a position of superiority, Jeff would easily be swayed to do as I wished, given his condescending view of me. This statement was born from such thoughts, but indeed, it contained many of my true feelings. As expected, Jeff's face turned red with anger, and he snatched the divorce papers from my hand, starting to write immediately. If you insist so much, I'll give you your divorce. I felt a sense of relief at Jeff's hasty action. I had worried that he might reconsider and calm down, but Jeff was simple after all. After receiving the half-completed divorce papers, I filled in my part to prevent any further unexpected events and completed it. I then entrusted the finished divorce papers to Stacy and turned back to Jeff's family. All that's left is to submit this to the city office. So take all the stuff you brought in with you. Wait a minute, are you serious? You said you'd feel relieved if Jeff signed the divorce papers. That's correct, but I never said I'd agree to the move. What about the renovation? What renovation? Unaware of the renovation discussed in her absence, my mother-in-law, standing next to my father-in-law, grabbed Nicole after receiving an explanation. A big argument started, and while my father-in-law and Jeff tried to intervene, I attempted to leave with Stacy. However, Jeff and Nicole, determined not to let us escape, grabbed at us, but the movers, who had been watching the situation with dismay, stepped in to mediate. Amid the chaos, we heard the sound of police sirens. Protected by the movers, I looked around and noticed neighbors gathered, drawn by the noise. Seeing a police car approaching with its red lights flashing, someone from the neighborhood must have called them, and we felt relieved. But that relief was short-lived as Jeff's entire family seemed about to attack us. Just in time, the police intervened and we were safe. Despite being stopped by the police, Jeff's family's commotion didn't cease, and another officer had to escort us into a police car to calm the situation. Nicole, mistaking our being escorted for an arrest, attempted to throw belongings into the house and was naturally stopped by the police, with additional support arriving to finally quell the disturbance. As Jeff's family began to calm down, the police asked us to accompany them for questioning, leading to further troubles when either Jeff, Nicole, or both acted against the officers. They were arrested for obstructing official duties and taken away in police cars that had arrived for backup. Jeff's parents were also scolded by the police and taken to the station for questioning. We watched the entire ordeal from the police car, where we gave a brief statement. Eventually, Jeff and I officially divorced. The divorce, initially resisted by Jeff even after signing the papers, was prolonged, but thanks to a lawyer, we were able to finalize it smoothly. Soon after, my house found a buyer and I was able to secure the money from the sale. Nicole was pushing for a renovation, but the house had already been renovated when my mother passed it down to me, so a buyer quickly appeared. Afterward, my in-laws were not prosecuted, but they cannot return to the house I inherited, and they had sold their own house expecting to move into mine, leaving them without a place to live. Furthermore, due to the commotion, they have become outcasts in the community, struggling to find a place to belong. It's inevitable given the extent of the uproar they caused. My claim for compensation has further cornered Jeff's family. The incident became well known at Jeff's workplace, leading to a pay cut followed by his voluntary resignation. Now, he is working day jobs to make compensation payments to me and, though only for a short while, child support for Stacy. Naturally, balancing income and expenses is difficult, and he seems to be juggling multiple jobs to keep up with the payments. Nicole, after the dust settled, continued working as a beauty consultant as if nothing had happened. However, rumors of the incident reached her customers and eventually the upper management, leading to her dismissal. She had been living a flashy lifestyle, so her savings quickly dwindled. Like Jeff, she is now working multiple jobs to make ends meet, including the compensation payments to me. As for my in-laws, it seems there was some trouble after the incident, leading to their divorce, and now they are living separately. The mother-in-law, now ostracized by the neighbors, was fired from her part-time job. The father-in-law, who was planning to enjoy his retirement with his pension, has had to allocate most of it to the compensation payments to me and is now looking for work despite his age. They are each in a difficult situation, but this is their reparation to us, and I hope they take this time to reflect. On the other hand, Stacy and I have moved to a new house, so even if Jeff's family tries to approach Stacy's school, it's no issue since she has already transferred. Continuing my work from home and thinking about spending peaceful days ahead with Stacy naturally brings a smile to my face. Feeling liberated from our past troubles, I plan to live happily with Stacy, just the two of us. My name is Jane. I am currently fulfilling my role as a professional while simultaneously raising my beloved only son, Paul. I have a long history of work experience and never intended to give up my career, even after getting married. Especially in my small but independent company, I have never faced a situation where my salary was reduced even after returning to work post-childbirth. During the leave I took for my son's childcare, I entrusted the management of the company to someone I trust, so I never worried about the management or progress of the business. However, the only issue that troubles me amidst my peaceful days is entirely different. It involves the presence of my mother-in-law. My husband Danny, our son Paul, and I lived together in a comfortable house. But soon after my father-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law suddenly imposed herself into our home. I assumed she would return to her own home after a short stay, but she chose to continue living with us without showing any intention to leave. When I gently inquired, "How long do you plan to stay with us?" her reaction was unexpected. She became emotional and exclaimed, "How could a heartless daughter-in-law attempt to drive out an old woman like me? After losing my beloved husband, being forced to live alone in my hometown is incredibly cruel." Danny, who had overheard part of the conversation, rushed to her side and comforted her. "Mom, it's okay. I would never kick you out, so please don't cry." After she calmed down, Danny took her to a different room. Once we were alone, he looked at me sharply and accused, "How can you say such horrible things to my mother? Do you not have a heart?" Misunderstandings might have arisen because Danny did not hear the whole conversation, but I had not forbidden my mother-in-law from living with us. As I explained, I was just asking how long you plan to stay, not that I wanted her to leave. He retorted, "Asking about the stay sounds like you want her to leave early. Can't you understand other people's feelings?" I regret using inappropriate words, but I never intended to drive her out. However, Danny, taking my mother-in-law's excessive reaction at face value, seemed to have decided I was in the wrong. I had no choice but to leave the situation as it was, making my daily life's small troubles deepen due to complex family relationships and the nuances of emotions involved. As a business owner, mother, and wife, I juggle these roles daily, trying to balance each. I wonder how long my mother-in-law plans to stay in our home. Asking her directly would likely result in her accusingly crying and appealing to Danny, so I hesitate to ask directly. Yet, When I contemplated how long she might stay, she unexpectedly announced, "I've sold my old house, so I'm moving all my belongings here," in front of the moving company truck parked outside our home, leaving me speechless. It was my day off, and I had planned to take Paul to the amusement park. However, Denny approached my mother-in-law, suggesting, "Then, today will be for sorting things out." This visit to the amusement park was a promise made long ago, eagerly anticipated by Paul, who looked disappointed when he asked, "Mom, what about the amusement park?" "Don't worry, Paul. As promised, we're going to the amusement park," I reassured him. Danny frowned and showed his dissatisfaction, asking, "Are you planning to leave the luggage unattended just for going to the amusement park?" I confidently argued, "Why should we change our plan for a family visit to the amusement park, breaking a promise to our child for sorting luggage?" I find such behavior unacceptable. The visit to the amusement park had been planned weeks in advance, with all preparations made for that day. Yet, I was not informed about the move, and when told today was the day for unpacking, I prioritized the plans already set. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law began to cry exaggeratedly, claiming Jane finds living with me uncomfortable. That's why she prioritizes her child over me. Hearing this, the movers, either feeling the situation was deadlocked or tired of my mother-in-law's exaggerated performance, quietly pointed out, "Unpacking can wait. Shouldn't promises to children take priority? And did you properly inform your wife about the move?" Upon hearing the calm comment, my mother-in-law blushed and felt ashamed. Danny, witnessing this development, did not defend her but merely looked at me intently. It appeared that Danny prioritized helping his mother with the move over our planned enjoyable family visit to the amusement park. In light of this situation, I decided to take my son, Paul, to the amusement park as previously planned. Unfortunately, this choice created a noticeable distance between my husband and me. One day, my mother-in-law said to me, "Jane, would you mind staying at home on your next day off?" I asked her why. "The truth is, I want to spend time with Paul, but since you always monopolize him, I hardly get the chance to play with him," she complained. This request came about a week after she had moved into our house without permission. She probably overheard my plans to take Paul to the shopping mall on my next day off. Suddenly, she forbade me from visiting the shopping mall, asserting, "Danny, Paul, and I will go to the shopping mall, so you should stay at home." Normally, there would be an option for the whole family to go out together, but excluding me seemed very selfish. Having witnessed her previous fake crying and such behavior, I could no longer trust her words. Therefore, considering it unthinkable to leave my child with someone I couldn't trust, I suggested, "Why don't we all go out together?" Although she looked displeased, she could not directly accuse me of being mean and reluctantly agreed. At the shopping mall, I began selecting clothes for Paul as originally planned, choosing slightly larger sizes considering children's rapid growth. My mother-in-law interrupted, "Why can't you choose the right size? This is the perfect size for Paul, bringing a size that fits him right now." Even when I explained, "Children grow fast," she argued, "when he grows, we can just buy new clothes. There's no need to save so much." I was dumbfounded by her short-sightedness. Selecting perfectly fitting clothes and buying new ones every time they become small is clearly a waste of money. We didn't have the financial leeway to spend money in such a way at our house. When I hesitated to purchase, Danny appeared and pointed out, "I support the family financially. If you try to save, it makes me look stingy to others." Eventually, Danny covered the shopping expenses for my mother-in-law. Paul wore his new clothes comfortably for a while but soon complained, "These clothes are too tight now," and stopped wearing the clothes chosen by my mother-in-law. She seemed to have mixed feelings about this change. Out of necessity, I passed the outgrown clothes to a colleague's mother I had befriended at the daycare. This act was well received, making me feel happy. However, the existence of the daycare seemed undesirable to my mother-in-law. "Why do you need to leave Paul with others when I'm here?" Moreover, continuing to work with a child is not good for their education, she criticized. I couldn't agree with this point, responding, "The reality is, we can't make ends meet without my job," but she just snorted. "How much do you even earn?" "I'm confident Danny's earnings surpass that. We can manage without your help. Besides, you're probably a burden at work anyway." It seemed possible that Danny hadn't told his mother about my role as a business owner. His occasional bragging nature might have led him to hide such an important fact, perhaps to avoid letting his mother know that his wife earns more than he does. Faced with such a situation, I was deeply disappointed. "Actually, I earn more than Danny," I explained calmly yet firmly. My mother-in-law's response turned to anger. "How can you say such a thing? Looking down on your own husband and boldly declaring you earn more. Do you not respect your husband? You neglect your duties at home and boast about out-earning him. Don't you have any respect for him? Danny can manage perfectly fine without you," she exclaimed furiously. As her anger reached its peak and her voice echoed throughout the room, Danny appeared, asking, "What's going on here?" As if she had found reinforcements, my mother-in-law spoke with renewed vigor. "Hey, Danny. Actually, we wouldn't be troubled without Jane, right? It should just be you, me, and Paul living happily together. Don't you think our life is being constrained because Jane is here?" She said. "What? Yeah," Danny hesitantly but eventually showed his agreement. "Then the best thing to do is to divorce," she continued, and shockingly, she immediately took out a divorce form. It seemed she had wanted our divorce for some time. I no longer had any expectations for a father who prioritizes his mother over his child. However, I had no intention of giving up custody of my child. "It seems my presence is entirely unwelcome. If you wish for a family of 3, then I shall leave this house," I responded calmly. And without hesitation, I signed the divorce form she proposed. Despite forcing me to cancel our amusement park plans and insisting on helping with the packing, as soon as I started preparing to move out, she took Danny on a trip. Though she invited Paul to a trip, he had seen her unpleasant behavior towards me and still resented her for nearly causing us to miss our amusement park trip. He chose to stay with me, declining her invitation. Thus, Danny and she ended up going on a trip alone. I took this opportunity to move mine and Paul's belongings to a new home. I also left a letter stating that the responsibility for future rent payments, custody, and property division would be Danny's, as outlined through a lawyer. Returning from a week-long trip, Danny and his mother, unaware of the situation, contacted me surprisingly quickly. "Jane, why did you take Paul with you? Mom is worried. I'm supposed to have custody, aren't I?" he accused. It became clear at that moment that Danny had not yet read the letter I left. "Please read the letter on the living room table," I said. Danny replied, "Oh, Mom said she would look at it first. I've outlined that you'll be taking on $4,000 rent responsibility, that I will not transfer Paul's custody, and that we'll discuss property division through a lawyer," I explained. "Rent is $4,000, he exclaimed in surprise. He knew the housing was rented and that I had been making the payments, but he was unaware of the specific amount. I couldn't believe he was unaware of the rent amount while managing our finances. Indeed, this house was a rental, costing a hefty $4,000 monthly, and initially, I was against living here. However, Danny was adamant about living in this house, and eventually, we rented it according to his wishes. As a president, you should have no problem with this level of rent, right?" he said, leaving the burden to me. As a result, I ended up paying $4,000 rent monthly, with Danny covering other living expenses. However, he was careless with money and prone to spending impulsively. There was an instance at the shopping mall where, after shopping without calculating, my mother-in-law ended up short at the register and reluctantly called me for help. It seems this mother and son lack financial management skills, often spending on personal luxuries before covering living expenses. I had to cover the shortfall each time. I had savings for Paul's future and was putting my entire salary into our household, leaving me with very little personal spending money. Recently, I also had to cover the expenses and pocket money for his mother, putting us in a financially tight situation. But with the divorce finalized, I am relieved from the burden of $4,000 monthly rent. Registering the house under his name, which was done for his vanity, turned out to be fortunate. This allows me to withdraw from the financial carelessness of the two, bringing significant mental relief. There's no way I can pay that amount. You've always been paying, continue doing so, he pleaded. Why should I pay the rent for a house I no longer live in? I was driven out by your mother. The divorce is finalized, and there's no longer any connection between me and that house. Therefore, I have no obligation to pay the rent, I counted. So, please help me, Denny begged pathetically, but then it seemed his mother grabbed his phone, and her voice came through. We can pay the rent without you. Even the amount you claim to have been paying is manageable for Danny, she asserted. With a take-home pay of only $2,000, how do you plan to pay the monthly rent of $4,000? Are you going to use magic? That would be remarkable, I said sarcastically. What? Came the reply. It seemed that my mother-in-law genuinely misunderstood Danny to be financially well off, probably because she saw him paying during their shopping trips, leading her to believe he was wealthy. I was just dumbfounded by this fact. I thought it was impossible for Danny, with his take-home pay of $2,000 and almost no savings, to afford the rent. Moreover, expecting them to raise a child healthily in their financially unstable situation would be difficult. Even without Paul's consent, custody would naturally fall to me, as Danny and my mother-in-law couldn't provide a suitable environment for raising a child. So, what should we do then? They were bewildered. If you can't pay the rent, you have no choice but to change your living situation. You'll have to notify the real estate agent to cancel your lease. The longer you delay, the more you owe in rent, I urged them to act swiftly. My words were met with, "Shut up. I know that much," from my mother-in-law, who clearly had no room for fake tears in this situation. After hanging up, I completed the move to a new apartment with Paul. This apartment is close to my workplace and conveniently located near shops and medical facilities. About a month after the divorce, my mother-in-law and Denny showed up at my company. They began loudly demanding to see me at the entrance, as reported by the receptionist. I was out having lunch with Paul at the time but hurried back with him upon hearing they were causing a commotion. Fortunately, there's a daycare within the company, so I could bring Paul inside. Seeing my mother-in-law and Danny waiting at the reception was a surprise. I was puzzled by their visit since the lawyer had reported they hadn't responded to our discussions. Jane, can't you just come back home? We understand you were making the payments. Please stop being stubborn, my mother-in-law pleaded with tears, thinking her act would work on someone other than her son. She clearly intended to paint me as the villain. Witnessing her behavior, Danny joined in. What do you mean by getting a lawyer involved? This is a family matter. Surely, Paul would prefer his parents to be together. However, a father who chooses his mother over his son would only sadden the child. I sighed and replied, now that we're divorced and essentially strangers, please communicate through my legal representative for anything. Danny, realizing he wouldn't get through to me directly, turned to Paul with my mother-in-law. Hey, Paul, you want to be with your dad and grandma, right? Aren't you lonely when your mom is always busy with work? Frightened by their words, Paul hid behind me and cried out loudly, I hate you both because you're mean. His crying had a more significant impact on the people around than my mother-in-law's fake tears. Soon after, other employees came and escorted Danny and my mother-in-law outside, to my relief. Later, after notifying them through the lawyer that any further company visits or following us would be reported to the police, they quieted down. Subsequently, Danny and my mother-in-law abandoned their $4,000 a month housing for a dilapidated apartment. Denny's fate took a darker turn as he had previously bragged about living in a luxurious home beyond our means at his workplace. Fearing the revelation of their move to a rundown apartment, he quit his job without consulting his mother, leading to her fury upon discovering his sudden job resignation. As a result, they started working to earn an income, frequently blaming each other for abandoning me and Paul, resulting in constant arguments. Despite this, they are trying to make ends meet, sending child support monthly while working hard. Meanwhile, my business is thriving, and despite the absence of his father, Paul is growing up to be a well-rounded boy. Even without an unfit father, I am determined to raise him well. Your presence is no longer needed. Really? How long do you plan to stay here? Leave this house quickly. You incompetent leech living off the money Steve left behind. Disappear. You're in the way. What? Can I really leave? Won't you regret this later? Of course. Don't make me repeat myself. I am Emma, 34 years old, working in the medical field. I met my husband, Steve, a 37-year-old surgeon, 2 years ago at the hospital we both worked at, and we got married. Upon marrying, I quit my job to focus on being a homemaker as per my husband's wish. Currently, I am 5 months pregnant and suffering from severe morning sickness. My husband is a respected surgeon, admired by his peers for his skill. He is kind, gentle, and loved by patients and hospital staff alike. Our marriage is strong, and he is incredibly supportive, actively helping with household chores without a single complaint. Despite his demanding job, his dedication to our family is something I am deeply grateful for. The only concern I have is related to my in-laws. Hey, Emma, I have a request. I'd like to live with my parents and my sister Abby. My dad needs care, and I want to support them as much as possible. It will also reduce the burden on my mom. Plus, with a baby on the way, having extra hands will be helpful for you, and it might make it easier for you to return to work. What do you think? That sounds good to me. I'm okay with it. Steve's family is kind, and if I can help take care of your father, it will lighten the load on your mom and Abby. Thank you, Emma. That means a lot to me. My mother-in-law has always been kind to me, and my sister-in-law Abby left a good impression during our family's meeting and our wedding, so I was confident we could build a good relationship. Thus, upon getting married, I started living with my in-laws and sister-in-law Abby. However, this shared living situation would soon change my life. One day, not long after we started living together, I was lying in bed in my room, still suffering from severe morning sickness, when I was called to the living room by my mother-in-law. My husband had left for work early in the morning, and my father-in-law was resting in another room, so it was just me, my mother-in-law, and sister-in-law Abby in the living room. My mother-in-law, usually calm, looked stern. Feeling tense, she suddenly spoke up. Emma, you're hardly managing the household chores, and yet you're lazing around in bed? Since you're not paying rent, I want you to contribute $5,000 to the household every month. This was the start of an incomprehensible discussion. I'm sorry, I've been suffering from continuous morning sickness and have hardly been able to get out of bed. I feel terrible for relying so much on you and Abby for household chores, but I thought I was contributing enough each month. Well, enough. You think a mere $2,000 is enough? We're letting you live here because we thought you'd help with the housework and take care of our father. You're not helping at all. Why did my son even choose someone like you as his wife? There's no need to say something so harsh. When I was young, regardless of morning sickness or anything else, I dedicated myself to my new family. You need to put in more effort. And I'm tired of taking care of that man. That's why I suggested to Steve that we all live together. Steve is a doctor, so $5,000 a month shouldn't be a big deal, right? Well then, I'm counting on you. We're going out for a bit, so take care of the housework and take care of our father. Useless sister-in-law. Saying this, the two of them left. I was shocked by their sudden change of attitude, as I thought we were getting along well. Despite not feeling well, I couldn't just sit around. So I managed to suppress my discomfort from the morning sickness and started cleaning, doing laundry, and preparing meals for my father-in-law. My father-in-law, though unable to move his lower body, did not show signs of dementia and communicated well. He seemed to feel guilty about me taking care of everything alone, especially considering my pregnancy. I'm truly sorry that you have to take on everything, Emma. Considering the baby and your own health, I wish it wasn't so burdensome for you. It's okay. Steve is very supportive, so I don't feel burdened at all. Besides, I enjoy the time I spend talking with you. I'm really grateful, my father-in-law said, tears welling up in his eyes, expressing his gratitude. That evening, when my husband returned home, I told him about the demand from my mother-in-law and Abby for a monthly contribution of $5,000. However, I didn't mention their change in attitude, not wanting to worry him. $5,000, huh? Understood. Well, we are living here and my parents are living on their pension. Abby also has a regular work and doesn't have a stable income. My husband agreed to the monthly payment of $5,000 without hesitation, understanding the situation. Since my husband was okay with it, I reluctantly agreed as well. Then, one day, I received a call that my husband had collapsed at the hospital while at work. Worried sick, I managed to calm my panic enough to find out which hospital he was taken to, and immediately called a taxi to rush there. Steve was already unconscious during the transport, and tears threatened to spill in the taxi. My mind was filled with pessimistic thoughts, hoping against hope that he would be okay. But, despite my wishes, Steve passed away shortly after we arrived at the hospital from an acute heart attack. He had left the house that morning with his usual kind smile, making it hard to accept the reality. Steve was only 37 years old. He had his whole life ahead of him, passionate about his work and excited to become a father soon. The thought of not being able to introduce our child to his or her father left me sobbing beside his body. Time passed, and my mother-in-law and Abby arrived at the hospital. My father-in-law had to stay home, so a helper was arranged urgently. Oh, I can't believe this. My dear Steve, why a heart attack? Really? This is all Emma's fault. Emma, if you had noticed Steve's health issues sooner, this tragedy wouldn't have happened. You're a disaster. Mom is right. The reason my brother died is because you came into our house. I'll never forgive you for taking him away. I'm truly sorry. Having just lost my husband, my heart was too broken to argue with them. I could only apologize. Maybe it was all my fault. If only I had noticed something was wrong with Steve sooner, he might still be alive. I was tormented by this thought for a while. Eventually, the funeral was held. Many of Steve's friends and colleagues came to say their goodbyes. I felt a profound loss and sorrow from the respect people had for my husband. But I knew I couldn't grieve forever. I have to become stronger for the sake of our child that's about to be born. I resolved. However, my resolve was quickly shattered by my in-laws' words. Look, Emma, just because Steve has passed away doesn't mean you're thinking of going back to your parents' house, right? Well, I'm expecting soon, and the morning sickness hasn't ended, so I might return to my parents' house a bit earlier. What? If you go back to your parents, what will happen to the daily routine here? Who will take care of Dad? You think you can just leave irresponsibly just because my brother died? As for taking care of Dad, hiring a helper could lessen the burden. Hiring a helper? What are you thinking? As long as you're here, there's no need for outside help. That's a waste of money. Angered by their words, I responded, may I remind you, my mother-in-law is almost always home, and Abby only works 3 days a week on a non-regular basis. Aren't you two perfectly capable of handling the household and taking care of Dad? My mother-in-law retorted, I'm busy with community activities and hobbies. I don't have time to do housework, let alone care for him. She spends her time at home just watching TV and lounging around, using any excuse to shift all responsibility onto me. On my days off from my part-time job, I'm busy looking for a marriage partner. I can't spare any effort or money on beauty treatments to find a handsome, high-earning man. Oh, I just don't have enough time. Unlike you, who can stay home all day? Abby, significantly overweight and far from the beauty ideal she claimed, bafflingly exuded confidence from nowhere. And Emma, it's not an exaggeration to say Steve's death is your fault. So, you'll continue to take care of the household and Dad, and we'll also need the same $5,000 a month for living expenses. We've heard about the savings Steve left behind, so paying shouldn't be an issue, right? But I don't have an income right now, and with the baby coming, expenses will increase. I wanted to save Steve's money for our child's future. Oh, but is that child really Steve's? Could it be someone else's? That's really funny. Really? Emma, you're so vulgar. Then it's even more unthinkable to use Steve's money for a child that might not be his. Please wait. This child is indeed Steve's. It's terrible to say such things. But realizing arguing was futile, I gave up on going back to my parents and resigned myself to contributing $5,000 a month for living expenses, continuing the household chores and caring for my father-in-law. It seems excessive for a family of 4 to need that much, especially with pension income. Though I have some savings, I didn't want to dip into the inheritance Steve left, preferring to save it for our child's future. Moreover, returning to my parents would leave my father-in-law without proper care. If help or support isn't an option, going back isn't either. My belly is getting heavier and it's tough, but it seems like I have no choice but to handle the household chores and caregiving on my own. I managed the household and caregiving tasks as best as I could, using delivery services for grocery shopping to keep it unnoticed by my mother-in-law and Abby. One day, while preparing a meal for my father-in-law, an incident occurred. "Hey, Emma, can I talk to you for a moment? There's something I need to tell you." "Yes, what is it?" At that moment, my mother-in-law and Abby were out, and it was just my father-in-law and me at home. "I wanted to tell you something while they're not around. Please listen to this." He handed me a voice recorder, and the moment I pressed play, I was shocked. "Is this my mother-in-law and Abby's voices? What are they saying? I can't believe this." I heard a conversation between my mother-in-law and Abby. I felt a growing outrage towards them, and it felt like something inside me broke. Unforgivable? Absolutely not. From there, my father-in-law and I devised a plan, and I was determined to carry it out. We waited for the night to come. When my mother-in-law and Abby returned home happily, I made them an offer. "Mother, Abby, as a token of my gratitude, how about a trip just for the two of you? Of course, my father-in-law and I will stay here." "A trip? Wonderful. I want it to be abroad." "Emma, that's a great idea. How about inviting 2 friends and all of us going to Europe?" "Of course, it's fine to invite your friends. Why don't you take a little break for about 2 weeks? Emma, you do come up with good suggestions sometimes. The thought of getting away from this depressing daughter-in-law and that old man, what an unexpected happiness." As a result, they planned a 2-week trip to Europe, including their friends, 1 month later, without suspecting our plan. Then, the day of their trip arrived. After seeing off the 2 who left in high spirits, I immediately started preparing to leave this home. Being in the later stages of pregnancy and unable to carry heavy items, I called my mother to help me. After telling my parents everything, they expressed their anger towards my mother-in-law and Abby but warmly welcomed me to come back home. Then, after completing the moving preparations, I expressed my gratitude to my father-in-law. "Though it was for a short time, I am very grateful for your care. After Steve passed away, you were the only one who always spoke to me with warmth. I am the one who should be grateful, Emma, for your caregiving. I'll be living in a care facility from now on, so don't worry. All that's left is to wait for those 2 to receive their just desserts." 2 weeks passed, and the day they returned from their trip came. While I was peacefully staying at my parents' house, my phone rang. My mother-in-law's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, she demanded I return home immediately, so I reluctantly agreed. "Welcome back, Mother. Did you enjoy your trip to Europe?" "Enjoyed it? That's not the point, Emma. We were happy to go on the trip you gifted us, but why are we being billed for it? There's a bill for $20,000. I thought it was lucky it only came to $20,000 for 4 of you. I was expecting it to easily exceed $30,000 with such luxurious accommodations." "What are you talking about? Boyfriend? We just invited some friends from the neighborhood, and it was just the 4 of us." "Oh, is that so? But I have evidence here. Please have a look at the envelope on the living room table." My mother-in-law and Abby were then confronted with a report from a detective. "What is this? You tricked us by hiring a detective, you sly woman." "No, it wasn't me who hired the detective. It was my father-in-law." "What Dad did?" "Yes, it was actually my father-in-law who had requested the investigation. One day, he grew suspicious of my mother-in-law and Abby's behavior and installed a hidden microphone in the living room to eavesdrop on their conversations. Listen, Mom. Last night, I went on a date with a charming man who earns over $1 million a year. He's married, but he showed a lot of interest in me and came on to me strongly. I ended up not coming home until morning. I'll make him divorce his wife and take him for myself. That's wonderful, Abby. Go ahead and get that man for yourself. I also hope my wealthy lover will divorce his spouse soon and become mine alone. Then, eventually, we'll leave this place and start a luxurious life. In fact, they were involved with married men and planning to leave my father-in-law behind and move out of the house. Furious with this revelation, my father-in-law and I planned the trip as a strategy. He expected them to bring their affairs along on the trip and hired a detective to investigate during their absence. The investigation revealed that the friends accompanying my other-in-law and Abby on the trip were, in fact, their extramarital lovers. Well, now that it's out, there's nothing else to do but to give up. I'm going to divorce your father and kick that man out of the house. And you, Emma, are no longer needed here. Really? How long do you plan to stay? Leave this house immediately. Leave, you worthless person living off the money Steve left behind. What? Can I really leave? Won't you regret this later? Of course. Don't make me repeat myself. Also, regarding the cost of the trip, you will be bearing it yourself. While I suggested the trip, I never mentioned it would be a gift. Humph, if it's about $20,000, I'll just have my wealthy lover pay for it. Is that so? Additionally, my father-in-law has already moved to a facility. Thank you for everything. Goodbye, and please do as you wish. Thus, I returned to my parents' home, feeling refreshed. After spending some peaceful time at home, one day, my mother-in-law and Abby unexpectedly showed up at the entrance. Emma, we apologize for our behavior up to now. Please come back, sister. I sincerely apologize for everything I've said and done. We really want you back. Oh, what brings both of you here? Why has it come to this? Our relationships outside were exposed, and the spouses are demanding a large compensation from us. I live on a pension, and Abby is in irregular employment with little savings. We don't know how to handle this. In fact, my father-in-law had sent the detective's report to the families of the lovers, resulting in a massive demand for compensation from them. Additionally, they were being sued for compensation for infidelity by my father-in-law as well. Moreover, we haven't settled the $20,000 for the trip yet. Could you possibly share Steve's inheritance with us? I categorically refuse. You treated me like a servant all this time. I cannot forgive you. Besides, the monthly living expenses of $5,000 were being paid out of my own savings, not from Steve's inheritance. What? You had that much in savings? I thought you worked in medical administration at a hospital. No, my daughter is a distinguished doctor at our hospital. My father, who is the director of a large hospital, appeared and informed them of the reality. Yes, I am his daughter and was working as a surgeon, recognized for my achievements and expected to succeed him as the director of the hospital. Steve and I were united by a romance that began at the same workplace. Recognizing the situation, my mother-in-law said, "Then, all the more reason we want you to come back, Emma. The future director of the hospital, please save us from our plight. We're going to suffer under debt. Please help us." Sister-in-law, they pleaded with tears. However, I firmly refused and securely locked the door. The commotion led to a neighbor calling the police, and they were eventually taken away in a police car. Later, my mother-in-law and Abby were demanded to pay compensation by the spouses of their lovers. My mother-in-law also had to pay compensation to my father-in-law. They were also reminded to pay for the trip, resulting in significant debt. The scandal spread throughout the neighborhood, forcing them to move. They now live in a small apartment, juggling multiple jobs to pay off their debts. A deserved outcome. As for my father-in-law, his divorce was successfully finalized, and he enjoys a stress-free life in a care facility. As for me, I safely gave birth to a girl and am living a fulfilling life with the support of my parents. Next month, I plan to return to work, placing my daughter in daycare. I intend to carry on Steve's legacy, moving forward as both a doctor and a mother.